March 15, 1917. A military courier station outside Verdun, France. Lieutenant Marcel Beaumont opens a small wooden crate expecting routine intelligence reports from the front lines. Instead, he finds something that makes his blood run cold. Tucked inside the aluminum capsule attached to Carrier Pigeon number 2709 isn't a military dispatch. It's a handwritten message in English, detailing the planned assassination of 3 British officers, complete with names, dates, and methods of execution. But here's what terrified Beaumont most. The handwriting matched documents he'd seen before, from someone who shouldn't have access to military pigeons at all. Within hours, French intelligence would uncover a conspiracy that stretched from the muddy trenches of the Western Front to the elegant parlors of Paris. A network of spies had weaponized the very birds trusted with saving soldiers' lives, turning them into couriers of death. But the truth was far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Before we uncover the truth about the Carrier Pigeon Spy Ring that exposed one of World War I's most chilling murder conspiracies, make sure to subscribe to Fierce Sermon and ring that notification bell. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from today. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers around the world. The year is 1916, and the Great War has transformed Europe into a landscape of unimaginable horror. In the muddy trenches stretching from the Belgian coast to the Swiss border, over 3 million men face each other across a no-man's land of barbed wire and death. Communication is the difference between survival and annihilation. A single delayed message can mean the massacre of an entire battalion. Enter the carrier pigeon, an unlikely hero of modern warfare. These birds aren't just messengers, they're lifelines. When telegraph wires are cut by artillery bombardment and radio signals are intercepted by enemy intelligence, pigeons fly through poison gas, machine gun fire, and exploding shells to deliver their precious cargo. The British Army alone maintains over 20,000 carrier pigeons by 1917. The French maintain even more. Some of these birds achieve celebrity status, their photographs appearing in newspapers, their courage celebrated in military dispatches. The Allied Pigeon Service operates from a network of lofts strategically positioned behind the front lines. One such facility sits just outside Verdun, a city that has become synonymous with the war's brutal stalemate. Between February and December 1916, the Battle of Verdun consumed over 700,000 lives. French and German soldiers ground into the mud in a meat grinder of unprecedented scale. By early 1917, the battle has subsided, but Verdun remains a critical hub for military communications. The pigeon loft there is managed by a man named Captain Henri Davout, a career military officer with 16 years of service. Davout is 43 years old, meticulous to the point of obsession, and utterly devoted to his birds. He maintains detailed logs of every pigeon's flight history, tracks their breeding lines, and personally oversees their care. His subordinates describe him as demanding but fair, a man who takes his responsibility with deadly seriousness. Working under Davout are 3 junior officers and a civilian specialist, a Belgian refugee named Émile Rousseau who was recruited for his expertise in avian care. Rousseau is 28, soft-spoken, and keeps largely to himself. He arrived at the loft in August 1916, bearing impeccable references from a destroyed facility in Belgium. He's mourning his family, killed during the German invasion, or so he tells everyone. His grief seems genuine. His work is exemplary. Also connected to the Verdun facility is Lieutenant Marcel Beaumont, a signals officer who coordinates between the pigeon service and field commanders. Beaumont is 32, pragmatic and exhausted. He's seen too much death, delivered too many messages announcing casualties. He doesn't particularly care about the birds themselves. They're just tools for him, like rifles or artillery pieces. But he understands their value and he ensures they're used effectively. In Paris, far from the front, the British Military Intelligence Section operates from a nondescript building near the Seine. Major William Ashford runs a small unit dedicated to counterintelligence, rooting out German spies who have infiltrated French and British operations. Ashford is 47, Cambridge-educated, and carries the bearing of old aristocracy. He's brilliant but frustrated. German intelligence has been extraordinarily successful at penetrating Allied operations, and Ashford suspects there are leaks at multiple levels. What none of these men realize, in early 1917, is that they're all connected to a conspiracy that will shatter their trust in everything they've built. The carrier pigeons they depend on, these symbols of loyalty and sacrifice, are being used to orchestrate murder from within their own ranks. The first hints of something wrong begin in January 1917, but like so many warning signs, they're dismissed as coincidence, as the chaos of war, as anything but what they actually are. Escalating incidents. Incident 1, The Missing Birds. January 18, 1917. Captain Davout notices something odd during his morning inspection of the Verdun loft. 3 birds are missing from their designated positions. This isn't unprecedented. Pigeons occasionally escape, especially during artillery bombardments when the loft structure shakes. But something about this particular absence troubles him. These aren't just any pigeons. They're breeding stock. Birds never used for field operations, kept in a separate, more secure section of the facility. He questions his staff. No one knows anything. Émile Rousseau suggests they might have been accidentally transferred to a field unit during a chaotic resupply operation the previous week. It's plausible. Record-keeping has become increasingly sloppy as the war grinds on and exhaustion sets in. Davout accepts the explanation but makes a note in his personal log. He circles it, underlines it twice. 4 days later, one of the missing birds returns. It lands in the loft, apparently healthy, carrying no message capsule. When Davout examines it, he finds something strange. The bird's identification band has been removed and then crudely reattached. Why would anyone remove a band? These bands are stamped metal, designed to be permanent identifiers. Removing one without proper tools would stress the bird considerably. Davout shows the band to Rousseau. The Belgian examines it carefully and offers an explanation. Perhaps the band was damaged during the bird's time away, and someone in a field unit attempted to repair it. Again, plausible. Again, Davout makes a note. But he doesn't circle this one. He draws a question mark next to it. The other 2 birds never return. Incident 2, The Intercepted Message, February 3, 1917. Lieutenant Marcel Beaumont receives an unusual report from a forward observation post. A French patrol has captured a German messenger who was carrying something unexpected, a carrier pigeon in a small transport cage. German forces use pigeons too, of course, but this bird bears markings suggesting it's French stock. When examined, the pigeon is found to be carrying a message, but the capsule is empty except for a small piece of paper with numbers on it. No words, just a sequence, 17-4-23-9-31-14. The German messenger, when interrogated, claims he found the bird and was bringing it back to his lines as a curiosity. His story is inconsistent. Under harsh questioning, he changes his account, saying he was paid by a civilian contact to transport the bird to a specific location behind German lines. He doesn't know why. He was just following orders, he insists. The interrogators don't believe him, but they can't break him further. The pigeon and its cryptic message are sent to Verdun for analysis. Beaumont brings them to Davout, who confirms the bird is indeed from their loft, one of the 3 that went missing in January. The numbers mean nothing to either man. They forward the information to Paris to Major Ashford's intelligence unit, assuming it's some kind of code. Ashford's team spends 2 weeks trying to crack the sequence. They assume it's a German cipher, perhaps coordinates or a date-time code. They try every decryption method they know. Nothing works. Eventually, they file it away as an oddity, possibly a decoy meant to waste their time. The war produces thousands of such mysteries, most of them meaningless. But Ashford, like Davout, makes a note. He has a habit of keeping a personal journal of unresolved cases, anomalies that might connect to larger patterns. He writes, French pigeon, German possession, number sequence, purpose unknown, monitor for similar incidents. Incident 3, The Dead Officers, February 24, 1917. 3 British officers are found dead in their quarters at a supply depot 12 miles behind the front lines. The deaths occur over a span of 3 days, and initially each is attributed to different causes. Captain Geoffrey Morrison dies in his sleep. Apparent heart failure, says the medical officer who examines him. Morrison was 34, in good health, no known heart condition. Lieutenant Peter Hartwell dies 2 days later from what appears to be food poisoning. He'd eaten at the officers' mess the night before, but no one else falls ill. The 3rd victim, Lieutenant James Covington, is found in his office with his service revolver beside him, an apparent suicide. 3 deaths in 3 days would be unremarkable in a war zone where death is omnipresent. Except for one detail, All three men worked in supply logistics, coordinating the movement of ammunition and equipment to frontline units. And all three had recently filed reports expressing concerns about irregularities in supply manifests, equipment going missing, discrepancies in inventory records. The deaths are investigated separately by different officers. No one connects them. No one except a junior quartermaster named Lieutenant David Shaw, who knew all three men and finds the timing too coincidental. Shaw requests a formal investigation. His request is denied. The British command structure is overwhelmed with genuine military concerns. 3 deaths among junior officers, each apparently explained, doesn't warrant diverting resources. Shaw writes a letter to Major Ashford in Paris, bypassing the chain of command. He outlines his suspicions and mentions the supply irregularities. The letter arrives on March 8th. The names mean nothing to him initially, but he follows procedure and reports it to Davout, who immediately recognizes that the pigeon carrying this message is the second bird that went missing in January. It's just returned, 3 months later, carrying what appears to be a warning about murders that have already occurred. Beaumont contacts British headquarters. Within 6 hours, he's connected with Major Ashford in Paris. When Ashford hears the 3 names, his blood runs cold. These are the dead officers Shaw wrote about. He orders an immediate investigation. Autopsies are performed on Morrison and Hartwell. Their bodies have been buried, but the medical examiners are thorough. What they discover transforms everything. Morrison's heart failure wasn't T-natural. Toxicology tests reveal traces of digitalis, a cardiac poison. Hartwell's food poisoning was actually arsenic poisoning, administered in a dose careful enough to mimic natural gastric distress. Covington's suicide is re-examined. The angle of the gunshot wound is inconsistent with self-infliction. 3 murders, disguised as natural deaths and suicide. All 3 men killed because they discovered something they shouldn't have. But who killed them? And how does a carrier pigeon deliver a warning about murders after they've already happened? Ashford travels to Verdun personally. He arrives on March 14th, carrying Shaw's letter and a growing sense that he's uncovered something far larger than simple espionage. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button. Share this with someone who loves dark mysteries. Let's discover what happens next. March 15th, 1917, 6:30 a.m. Major Ashford stands in the Verdun pigeon loft with Captain Davout and Lieutenant Beaumont. Morning light filters through the wooden slats. The birds coo softly in their compartments, unaware they're at the center of a murder investigation. Ashford examines the message capsule from the warning pigeon. It's standard issue, aluminum, unremarkable. But when he looks closer, he notices something odd. There are faint scratches on the interior surface, as if someone tried to remove something that was glued inside. He shows this to Davout. Has anyone ever modified these capsules? Ashford asks. Added false bottoms, secondary compartments? Davout shakes his head. Impossible. We inspect every capsule. These are precision instruments. Any modification would be obvious. Unless, Beaumont says slowly, someone modified them before they arrived here. This triggers something in Davout's mind. He retrieves his logbooks, the meticulous records he's kept for over a year. He traces back through supply deliveries, trying to remember anything unusual. Then he finds it, a notation from July 1916. A shipment of replacement capsules arrived from Paris, sent by an auxiliary supply unit. The paperwork was in order, but Davout made a note because the capsules were slightly different from their usual stock. Lighter weight, marginally different dimensions. He'd questioned it at the time, but the differences were so minor he'd accepted them. These capsules, Ashford says quietly, could carry 2 messages, one visible, one hidden. Someone's been using your birds to pass information that bypasses all standard monitoring. They begin a systematic inspection of every message capsule in the loft. It takes 3 hours. Of the 200 capsules in inventory, 47 show signs of modification. Ashford's hands are shaking by the time they finish counting. This isn't just a spy operation. This is a communication network operating inside the Allied military infrastructure, using the most trusted and least monitored system available. But the real discovery comes when Ashford asks to see the personnel records for everyone who has access to the loft. Davout produces files for his 3 junior officers and for Émile Rousseau. Ashford reads through Rousseau's file carefully. The references check out. The backstory is convincing, but Ashford has been in intelligence long enough to know that the best cover stories are built on partial truths. He sends an encrypted telegram to London. requesting verification of Rousseau's identity and background. The response arrives 18 hours later and confirms Ashford's worst suspicions. Émile Rousseau is real. He was a Belgian pigeon specialist. But the real Rousseau died in September 1916 in a German bombing raid. The man working at the Verdun loft is an imposter who assumed Rousseau's identity. Ashford orders Rousseau's immediate arrest. French military police surround the loft at dawn on March 16th, but when they enter Rousseau's quarters, they find the room empty. He vanished sometime during the night, taking nothing with him except the clothes on his back. A search of his quarters reveals a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside, they find materials that paint a horrifying picture: detailed maps of British and French supply routes, lists of officers' names and duty assignments, encoded messages written in German, and, most damning, a small notebook containing dates, bird identification numbers, and cryptic references to assignments completed. Cross-referencing the notebook with the dates of the 3 officers' deaths reveals a pattern. Each assassination was preceded by a pigeon flight, logged in Rousseau's notebook as carrying special cargo. The birds weren't carrying the hidden messages themselves. They were carrying information to handlers in the field who then executed the murders. But here's where the discovery becomes truly chilling. The notebook contains 19 completed assignments, not just 3. Major Ashford realizes they haven't uncovered 3 murders. They've uncovered 19, and there are 6 more names in the notebook marked as pending. Ashford spreads the notebook pages across Devout's desk. Beaumont leans in, reading the entries. "Dear God," he whispers, "how many people has he killed?" "Not him personally," Ashford corrects. "This is a network. Rousseau, or whatever his real name is, was the coordinator. He had agents embedded throughout our infrastructure. They used the pigeons to communicate, bypassing every security protocol we have." The investigation expands rapidly. Within 48 hours, Ashford's team identifies 8 of the 19 victims. They're scattered across different units, different locations, different apparent causes of death. A logistics officer in Amiens who supposedly drowned. A quartermaster in Calais who died in an accidental fire. A supply coordinator in Reims who fell from a wagon and broke his neck. Deaths that seemed random tragic accidents in a war zone where accidents happen constantly. But they weren't accidents. They were assassinations carefully disguised, targeting men who had discovered anomalies in supply chains, equipment disappearing, manifests altered, resources being diverted. The victims weren't stumbling onto a spy ring. They were uncovering something even more sinister, a conspiracy to steal military supplies and sell them on the black market, profiteering from the war while soldiers died for lack of ammunition and equipment. The carrier pigeons weren't just exposing murder plots. They were evidence of a criminal enterprise operating inside the Allied military, using murder to protect its profits. Investigation aftermath. The scope of the investigation becomes enormous. Major Ashford is given authority to form a special task force, pulling officers from British, French, and Belgian intelligence services. They call it Operation Nightingale, a darkly ironic name for an investigation centered on birds. The first breakthrough comes when they trace the modified message capsules. The original shipment came from a manufacturing facility in Paris, a small workshop contracted to produce supplies for the military. The owner, a man named Claude Mercier, is brought in for questioning. Under interrogation, Mercier admits that in early 1916, he was approached by a well-dressed civilian who offered him substantial money to make slight modifications to certain capsules before delivery. The man claimed it was for a legitimate intelligence operation, showed identification papers that appeared authentic, and paid in gold. Mercier, struggling financially and patriotic enough to believe he was serving France, complied. The description of the civilian matches no known intelligence officer. The identification papers were forgeries. Mercier provides a sketch artist with details, and the resulting portrait is circulated to every military installation in France. Within a week, 3 separate officers report having seen the man at different locations, always near supply depots, always claiming to be conducting inspections on behalf of headquarters. The task force creates a timeline. The conspiracy began in late 1915 or early 1916. The mastermind, still unidentified, recruited a network of corrupt officers and civilian contractors. They systematically diverted supplies, ammunition, medical equipment, food rations, anything valuable. The stolen materials were sold through black market channels to civilians and, investigators later discover, even to German procurement officers through neutral intermediaries in Switzerland. The scheme generated enormous profits. Estimates suggest over 2 million francs worth of supplies were stolen between 1916 and 1917, enough to equip an entire division. While soldiers in the trenches died from infected wounds because of insufficient medical supplies, these profiteers grew rich. The 19 murdered men were victims of their own diligence. Each had noticed irregularities. Each had filed reports or begun asking questions. Each became a liability to the conspiracy. The assassination orders were transmitted through the Carrier Pigeon network, hidden messages and modified capsules coordinating the murders to look like accidents or natural causes. The investigation uncovers 7 members of the network by April 1917. 3 are junior supply officers, 2 are civilian contractors, 1 is a warehouse supervisor, and 1 is a captain in the logistics corps who had been above suspicion because of his exemplary service record. All 7 are arrested simultaneously in coordinated raids across France. The trials begin in May 1917, conducted in military courts under tight security. The proceedings are not publicized. The military high command fears that revealing the extent of the corruption would damage morale and give propaganda ammunition to Germany. The trials are swift and the verdicts predetermined. 5 defendants are convicted of treason, profiteering, and murder. Under military law during wartime, the sentence is death. The executions are carried out by firing squad on June 3, 1917, at dawn in a courtyard at Vincennes Fortress. They are not public. No photographers are present. The condemned men are allowed no final statements. Their names are struck from military records. Their service histories erased as if they never existed. The 2 other defendants received prison sentences. They were minor participants who cooperated fully with investigators and provided testimony against their co-conspirators. They spend the remainder of the war in military prisons and are released in 1919, forbidden from ever speaking about the case. But the man they most want remains free. The impostor who called himself Émile Rousseau vanishes completely. Despite a manhunt involving hundreds of military police and intelligence officers, he's never found. Ashford becomes obsessed with the case, dedicating years to tracking him. He follows leads across Europe in the 1920s. Rumors of a man matching Rousseau's description in Brussels, then Amsterdam, then Copenhagen. Every lead goes cold. In 1923, Ashford receives an anonymous letter postmarked from Buenos Aires. It contains a single photograph, a man who might be Rousseau, older and heavier, standing on a dock with ships in the background. On the reverse side, written in pencil, "You were very close, Major, but not close enough. I hope you sleep well. E.R." Ashford will carry that photograph until his death in 1941. He never stops looking. He never finds him. The 6 officers whose names were marked as pending in Rousseau's notebook are quietly reassigned to positions away from supply logistics. They're given no explanation, just urgent transfer orders. All 6 survive the war. None of them ever learned they were marked for death. The Carrier Pigeon service undergoes immediate reforms. All message capsules are replaced with new designs that cannot be modified. Stricter identity verification is implemented for personnel assigned to pigeon lofts. The birds themselves become subject to more rigorous tracking, every flight logged, every return inspected, any anomaly investigated. Captain Henri Davout requests a transfer to frontline duty. He feels personally responsible for failing to detect Rousseau's deception. His request is denied. Instead, he's promoted to major and placed in charge of reorganizing the entire Allied pigeon service. He serves in this capacity until the war's end, implementing security measures so thorough that no similar breach ever occurs. But those who work with him note that he's changed. The obsessive attention to detail has become something darker. Paranoia and inability to trust. He retires from the military in 1919 and moves to a small village in Provence, where he lives until 1956. He never keeps birds again. Lieutenant Marcel Beaumont is commended for his role in uncovering the conspiracy. He's offered a promotion and a position in military intelligence. He declines. He returns to Signal Corps duty and serves until the war ends. He never speaks publicly about the case. When interviewed in 1932 by a military historian, he refuses to discuss it, saying only, "Some things are better left buried. The men are dead. The war is over. Let it rest." Lieutenant David Shaw, whose letter to Ashford initiated the investigation, receives a quiet commendation that's never entered into his official record. He survives the war and returns to England, where he works as an accountant in Manchester. He marries, has 3 children, and lives until 1963. In his later years, he occasionally tells his grandchildren about the war, But he never mentions the carrier pigeons or the murder conspiracy. Some stories, he believes, aren't meant for family audiences. The families of the 19 murdered men are never told the truth. They receive the official explanations: heart failure, accident, suicide, disease. The military high command decides that revealing the truth would serve no purpose except to cause additional pain. The victims are honored as war dead, their names inscribed on memorials. Their murders remain classified secrets for decades. Broader implications. The Carrier Pigeon Conspiracy of 1917 remains one of the least known scandals of World War I, but its implications extend far beyond the 19 murders and the millions in stolen supplies. First, it exposed fundamental vulnerabilities in military communication systems. The carrier pigeon service had been considered inherently secure. Birds couldn't be interrogated, couldn't be bribed, couldn't defect. But this assumption created complacency. No one imagined that the physical infrastructure supporting the birds, the capsules, the handlers, the lofts, could be compromised. The conspiracy proved that even the most seemingly foolproof system has human elements that can be corrupted. This lesson influenced military intelligence practices for generations. When radio communication became standard in World War II, security protocols were built with redundancy and verification systems specifically designed to prevent the kind of single point of failure vulnerability that Rousseau exploited. The principle of trust but verify became foundational to military communication security, a direct legacy of the Pigeon Conspiracy. Second, the case highlighted the psychological dimensions of wartime corruption. The men involved in the conspiracy weren't German spies motivated by ideology or patriotism. They were opportunists who saw war as a business opportunity. The scale of the conflict, the chaos of mobilization, the enormous flows of material, all created opportunities for theft that peacetime economies would never permit. The war didn't create these corrupt individuals, it simply revealed what they were capable of when given opportunity and cover. This understanding influenced how militaries approached supply chain security in subsequent conflicts. The Logistics Corps in World War II implemented cross-checking systems, random audits, and separation of responsibilities specifically designed to make large-scale theft more difficult. The accounting practices developed in response to WWI profiteering became standard operating procedure. Third, and perhaps most disturbingly, the case revealed how easily murder could be disguised in wartime. The 19 victims died in ways that seemed unremarkable in a war zone where death was omnipresent. Heart attacks, accidents, suicides, disease. These were common enough that no one questioned them until a pattern emerged. This vulnerability wasn't unique to WWI. It's inherent to any environment where death is normalized. Criminal investigators in subsequent decades studied the Pigeon Conspiracy as an early example of serial murder disguised as natural deaths. The care taken to vary the methods, the patience shown in spacing out the killings, the attention to choosing victims whose deaths would seem plausible. These were hallmarks of sophisticated criminal planning. Cases from the 1920s onward show investigators becoming more alert to patterns of natural deaths in institutional settings, a direct result of lessons learned from cases like this. Fourth, the conspiracy demonstrated the power of specialized knowledge as a tool for crime. Rousseau's expertise with carrier pigeons wasn't just his cover, it was his weapon. His understanding of how the system worked, what could be modified without detection, how to exploit routine procedures, this specialized knowledge made him far more dangerous than any amateur could be. This pattern repeats throughout criminal history. Technical experts who turn their knowledge toward illegal ends are extraordinarily difficult to detect and stop. This realization influenced how organizations approach internal security. Background checks became more thorough. Monitoring of specialists with access to sensitive systems increased. The principle that expertise creates both value and risk became embedded in security thinking. The Pigeon Conspiracy also had unexpected effects on post-war criminal investigation techniques. Major Ashford's methodical approach, creating timelines, looking for patterns across apparently unrelated deaths, using documentary evidence to reconstruct criminal networks, became a model for detective work. Several of his junior officers went on to influential careers in civilian police forces, bringing these methods with them. The Metropolitan Police in London and the Sûreté in Paris both incorporated Ashford's investigative techniques into their training programs in the 1920s. Perhaps most significantly, the case influenced how governments handle wartime secrecy and truth-telling. The decision to classify the entire conspiracy, to execute the perpetrators in secret, to lie to the victims' families, These choices were made with understandable motives. The military command feared damaging morale, feared giving propaganda advantages to the enemy, feared exposing the extent of internal corruption. But the secrecy came with costs. The families of the murdered men lived with false narratives about their loved ones' deaths. Officers who might have learned from the case were kept ignorant, preventing the kind of widespread institutional learning that could have prevented similar schemes. The public, who deserved to know about corruption in their military, was kept in the dark. This tension between operational security and public accountability has never been fully resolved. Every major conflict since WWI has produced similar debates about what information should be classified and for how long. The Carrier Pigeon case is often cited in these discussions as an example of secrecy taken too far, maintained too long, serving institutional interests rather than justice. The conspiracy files were finally declassified in 1968, 51 years after the events. By then, all the principal figures were dead. The revelation generated brief historical interest, but no real scandal. Too much time had passed. The world had endured another global war. The Carrier Pigeon murders seemed like ancient history, but historians who studied the newly available documents were struck by one detail that appears repeatedly in Major Ashford's personal notes. He became convinced, based on evidence he could never quite prove, that the conspiracy extended beyond the 7 men convicted. He believed there were other participants, higher-ranking officers and influential civilians, who successfully concealed their involvement. Names appear in his notes, circled with question marks beside them. Some of these names belonged to men who went on to prominent post-war careers: a general who became a minister of defense, a logistics colonel who founded a successful shipping company, a civilian contractor who became wealthy in reconstruction efforts. Ashford could never prove these suspicions. The evidence was circumstantial, the connections suggestive but not definitive. He made quiet inquiries that went nowhere. He wrote letters to authorities that received polite dismissals. He watched these men prosper while the convicted conspirators moldered in graves, and he wondered if justice had truly been served, or if the most guilty had simply been the most clever. His final journal entry, written shortly before his death in 1941 as German bombs fell on London during the Blitz, reads, "I have spent 24 years haunted by pigeons and the men who corrupted them. I have concluded that we caught the soldiers but missed the generals. The conspiracy we uncovered was real, but I fear it was only part of a larger truth we never grasped. Perhaps that's the nature of such things. We catch fragments, we punish some, and we tell ourselves justice is done. But the larger patterns remain hidden, protected by rank and respectability. I will die not knowing if we truly won or merely interrupted them." These words, discovered when his papers were donated to the Imperial War Museum in 1967, suggest that the Carrier Pigeon conspiracy may have been even more extensive than the official record indicates. But with all the principals dead and evidence long since destroyed or lost, we will never know the full truth. What we do know is this: 19 men were murdered because they were diligent at their jobs. An unknown number of soldiers died because supplies they needed were stolen and sold. A criminal network operated inside the Allied military for at least 2 years, protected by the chaos of war and the assumption that the Carrier Pigeon system was incorruptible. And at least one mastermind escaped justice entirely, possibly living out his life in comfortable anonymity. The Carrier Pigeons themselves, of course, were innocent. They did what they were bred to do: fly home faithfully, carrying whatever burdens were placed upon them. They couldn't know that their loyalty was being exploited, that the messages they carried were orchestrating murders. In that sense, they were like the soldiers in the trenches, faithful servants of a system that sometimes failed them catastrophically. The last Carrier Pigeon officially retired from military service in 1948. The birds had been made obsolete by radio and then by more advanced communications technology. But their legacy, including the dark chapter of 1917, remains part of military history, a reminder that no system is immune to corruption, that war creates opportunities for the worst of human nature, and that sometimes the most trusted messengers carry the darkest secrets. Closing engagement. What do you think drove these men to murder their own comrades for profit while war raged around them? Was it simply greed, or does war itself corrupt those who see it as opportunity rather than duty? Leave your theories in the comments below. And if you know anyone fascinated by the hidden crimes of history, share this video with them. These stories deserve to be remembered, even when they were meant to be forgotten. Subscribe to Fear Sermon for more lost chapters of history. The case is filed away, classified, and buried, but too compelling to remain hidden forever. Next week, we'll explore another conspiracy that authorities tried to erase from the historical record. Until then, remember, the most dangerous secrets are the ones carried by those we trust most. See you in the next video.